Happy Father's Day. Now, you may be thinking that Father's Day was a week ago, but since I started this on Father's Day, technically I can still get away with saying it. And today is a special little video as we cover a special topic that you may be aware of. All the fathers in Five Nights at Freddy's suck. Okay, maybe an exaggeration, but all of the upfront major character fathers, especially in the games, really do drop the ball. Some suck more than others, but save for one exception, there's a lot of god-awful choices and decisions. And I get it, humans are flawed. But in a series that often leans on the parents never help trope, at least in the books, while also hopping onto the honor thy father and sins of the father tropes, we should really take stock on these bad dads. Plus, they're not humans, they're game and book characters, so we can't exactly hurt their feelings. We're going to cover some of them right now. Let's start with William Afton, who is hands down the worst father in the franchise. I don't even need to say it. I have a whole video going through how manipulative and disgusting he is, but let's make this brief. By all indications, the Afton family seems to mirror the scapegoat, golden child, forgotten child dynamic. Elizabeth Afton was his favorite, but not only was he physically abusive to her, hitting her repeatedly, as revealed in the books that Scott had a very big part in making, so the it's not canon excuse doesn't matter as Fnaf God planted this seed. But he was negligent enough to leave her alone at a party and let her get eaten by his death trap. And then start using the death trap as intended anyway, only deciding to set her free from the rental facility likely because he no longer had access to her. Michael Afton is his scapegoat, or more bluntly, his sacrificial lamb that he sends down to get baby. I doubt William isn't aware of what he created and the stuff going on down there, so he sends someone who looks like him to save his own skin, literally. Then after Michael returns, and we don't know the timeline of this, but this seems to be the case, William just disappears. It could be that he was spring-locked immediately after Sister Location, which is quite convenient. But it would also make more sense with his character that once Michael did what he wanted him to do, he didn't need him anymore. And then we have the crying child, who is in some sort of PG-13 version of Saw, being monitored, being watched, being befriended by an apathetic plush toy that just happens to be found with a radio in the same room that uses monitor equipment to monitor the bedroom from FNAF 4. Not to mention the observation rooms that are his house and the diner. This is some sick stuff. And even if that wasn't going on, the crying child is clearly facing some amount of neglect. His brother mercilessly bullies him, he's constantly forced to return to a place that scares him, he's left locked in a back room with what may be a body. He's alone pretty much constantly. I don't care if brother did it. Parents owe it to their kids to step up and stop stuff from going on like this. So yeah, William Afton is a monster, no kidding. Now, there are some headcanons that William is a good father and went mad because one of his children died. And that's all well and good if it's like your personal AU or what you want to believe in. But if we're talking about the actual canon, that isn't the case. Because it seems very likely that Elizabeth died first, and William was making death traps before her death. She died to one of them. And even if one of his kids' death did set off the rest, that doesn't excuse what he did to the others. So FNAF itself doesn't imply that William isn't a piece of garbage, and him just having kids doesn't mean that he has this secondary life as a good dad. Some serial killers can live perfectly normal double lives. William cannot. He doesn't want to. Now let's move on to the other well-known dad, Henry. Now I've gone into Henry quite a bit, and in about a week or two I will be deep diving into him again for something completely different, something very interesting, but completely different. So I will try to keep this on the brief side because there is a possibility that I'll cover some of this in that video as well, and I don't want to really repeat myself that much, even though I pretty much am repeating myself now. Despite the fact that Henry is seen as sort of the good dad, both in the games and the books, he is portrayed as a very selfish person. In the games, he is aware that his daughter is in the puppet for some time, but he doesn't do anything about it, or try to stop William until he decides that he's ready to sleep, as by his own wording. He then traps her in a bear suit that is steadily shocking her, and you may say it's a gentle shock to keep her sedated, But the only shocking we've seen in Fnaf has been violent and damaging, as stated in Pizzeria Simulator itself. So I don't know how gently this steady voltage is. But the worst part is, despite wanting to set her free, he instead locks her up with her murderer and a bunch of other freaks until he's ready to put on his big show. She really did not have to go through more suffering just so he could show up William and make himself feel better. And you may say this is part of the plan to get them all together, but this is just Henry's plan. And it's a bad plan because by taking them all together, not only is he not aware if it actually works, but he doesn't get to make sure that no stragglers keep on keeping on. Consider this. Henry's greatest pain is the loss of his daughter, but he often puts that pain in front of his actual daughter. He doesn't care if he hurts her because he's hurting about her. And this is made all the more clear in the books, the only place where we get actual info on Henry. The third book in particular, which tells us the most about his mindset, was written at the same time as Pizzeria Simulator was being made, and that depiction of Baby has some reflection on Game Baby, and is the only place where we can actually read about Henry since he isn't shown in previous games. So this is a sourceable source as far as I'm concerned. Even if the events are different, the character is likely the same, like with William, like with Baby. Charlie dies and Henry makes a robotic duplicate to replace her. He's so determined to replace her, in fact, that he stages a fake kidnapping scene to convince her that her twin brother was kidnapped, giving her a false memory of it. But this is not Charlie. She doesn't have her memories. So Henry gave her trauma for no reason at all. Why would you unnecessarily force your kid to witness a variation of their death when you didn't have to? Wouldn't you want to shield your kid? This point gets worse, but I'll get back to that in a minute. There's also this scene that is likely graphic novel exclusive that shows him gutting a toy in front of her and makes her cry. Oof. Henry eventually sobers up and realizes his mistake. So what does he do? He doesn't finish Charlie's bodies. He drops her into his sister's lap and then ends his life. And I'm not faulting him for ending his life. I'm faulting him for absolutely screwing Charlie over. He created this being that feels and thinks and doesn't carry through, putting her in a terrible situation where she either gets stuck in an unfinished body altered by Afton, or living as a teenager forever. And once again, this pain roots from the loss of Henry's daughter, but he can't even love another daughter enough to secure her future. But what he does to Sammy, Charlie's twin, is pretty bad too. He ditches him. Charlie was his favorite and Sammy was his wife's, as stated in the books. And after Charlie's death, he stops caring that Sammy exists. And do you know how we know this? Because he makes those fake memories of Sammy's kidnapping. In that decision, Henry decided that Sammy was never going to be a part of the new Charlie's life, or his own, and was willing to use him as a prop and cut him out permanently. And again, he didn't have to do this. The only reason he did this was because he couldn't get over that regret, so he had to retroactively relive the same events to feel like he rewrote them in some way. He didn't think twice about Sammy, so he's also a deadbeat dad. The thing that gets me about Henry specifically is that a lot of folks make excuses for his character, but excuses only go so far. Have you seen BoJack Horseman? BoJack Horseman's a show that delves into the concept of trauma, generational trauma, and most importantly, how you are on the hook for your own actions. That you can't blame other people or tragedies. You are, at your core, responsible for what you do. It's you, BoJack. It's you. Henry is a man who suffers tremendously. He is a victim, but that doesn't excuse his decisions, especially towards the people he agreed to take care of. So there's that. We'll leave it there and move on to our next book-exclusive character, Clay Burke, the police chief in town who helps Charlie Emily, Henry's daughter, and her friends. In fact, one of her closest friends is his son, Carlton. Clay seems like a level-headed guy at first, and then he ignores his son being missing overnight because he thinks it's a prank, even when Charlie warns him, and then starts bringing people to active crime scenes to poke around. Let's go into both of these. Sure, Carlton is a cut-up, but are we really supposed to assume he routinely doesn't come home as a gag? apparently not, as Carlton's mother, Betty, is immediately on to the fact that something's wrong here and calls him out on it, to which Clay kinda mumbles and begrudgingly investigates. Even when Carlton's friends are insisting that something's up. That's bad. But also, Clay kind of steps in as a surrogate father to Charlie, kind of sometimes, doing activities such as taking her to crime scenes, telling her about women who resemble her being killed, and then kinda not doing anything about it. Thanks for the tip, Clay. Clay is, at best, incompetent at his job, and at worst, a detached moron. He isn't the worst father ever. He does obviously love Carlton. But yeah, he's not winning any Dad of the Year awards, at least not without a little work. Now onto the ever-popular Cassie's dad. Don't let theories or speculations get you twisted. We know pretty much nothing about this man. We know he likes Bonnie. People believe he might be one of the teenage bullies who tormented the crying child, in which case he would be downright elderly, but even then we don't know diddly squat about who he is as a person. He may be Mapbot. That still doesn't say much. Cassie's father is an interesting case, as we don't have enough to go on either way. We don't know if Cassie's father sucks. But this note does. This note is found in ruin and is likely from Cassie's father to her. It might not be, but it might be, so let's pretend it is. 'Cause this is all we have to go on. It reads, "Gone for a while. Money for food on counter. Emergency contacts on fridge." He doesn't say where he's going, or when he's gonna get back. He doesn't even sign like an "I love you" or a "be careful, good night." It's totally detached. It's like he's writing a note to a coworker instead of the daughter he lives with. In fact, it might just be a letter from one coworker to another. Because that's how it feels, though the emergency money and contacts beg to differ. Look, even if you're not sure when you're going to get back, it might be nice to, tell your kids something, especially if you trust them enough to leave them alone. Not leave them in limbo of, "Where's Dad?" And I get it. Parents don't have to be overly lovey, but, there really should have been, a love dad here. To any possible parents watching this video, there's nothing wrong with leaving a love mom or love dad in. Cassie needs a love dad right now. Dad's just going out, be back whenever. If someone tries to break in, call someone else, and go get your own dinner. You could have at least bought her a pizza. You work at a pizzeria. And you may be saying, he's a good dad. Cassie speaks fondly of him. I don't know about that. Seems to me that Cassie speaks of him, but she says nothing overly descriptive. Plus, she strikes me as a pretty isolated kid. She knows his favorite character is Bonnie. But I'm sure Michael Afton probably knows what his dad's favorite character is, too. It's Mr. Hippo. What I'm getting at is that we don't know anything about this guy. Moving on. The Fazbear, Frights, and Tales from the Pizzaplex books are an interesting case because there's a couple of good or decent dads and a slew of awful ones. I'm talking a lot of fathers who abandon their kids in the book, or are abusive, or are just flat out neglectful. Same could go for the mothers. There's just a lot of suckage there. So you gotta pick through that to find the few good ones. And that's not to say that there aren't good ones, but the majority feels like there's something lacking, and the standouts are awful. So I won't tackle all of the characters, but I will say there are some good examples and some really, really bad examples. In fact, let's do something fun this time that we've never done before. Since I don't feel like going through all the book dads right now, if you have a book dad in mind who kind of stands out for good or bad reasons, feel free to leave a comment about them. And then if anyone's interested, you can look down there and read them. This is strictly optional though. It's not mandatory, but it just might be a nice way to get that across, because I don't feel like going through all of the books right now. Anyway, with all that out of the way, there's two things I've got to mention. One, obviously, again, like I said earlier, these are characters. They're not real people. And that's why I'm allowed to judge them so harshly. They're drawn that way, They're fiction. Secondly, what do I think a good father is? Well, let's put it this way. I don't think a father has to be perfect, and I don't think a flawed father is necessarily a bad one. But anyone with half a brain cell should know when they're hurting their kid, when they're neglecting their kid, and if they don't care, then they've got to be a real garbage person. And no, before you ask, I don't consider things like punishment to be neglect. My definition of neglect is when there's a deficiency in presence, love, or responsibility that negatively affects their kid. William used his kids as trophies and tools. Henry idolized the concept of his kid more than his actual kid. Clay was sort of just an all-around hot mess. And Cassie's dad, oh, well, we don't know anything about him. Who knows what he is? These are some of the major figures in FNAF's games and books, and they're not looking too hot. But are there any good fathers in FNAF? Well, good ones that we don't have to scour the books to find. Well, there is one. One father who, despite the circumstances, stands tall as an unwavering protector and concerned caregiver who stands out above all the rest, and not just because he is larger than life. And his name is Glamrock Freddy. Glamrock Freddy may not be human, but he is a father. No, he's not a father. He's a dad. Even when confronted with the prospect of taking care of a child who is not his, not only does he eagerly do so, but he does his best. He is kind, compassionate, protective to a fault, and though he can be a little airheaded at times, he never wavers from doing what he thinks is right. Even if it goes against the rules, even if it goes against the Pizzaplex, Freddy will do what needs to be done. When Freddy first meets Gregory, he is friendly but helpful, taking him under his wing if only to help him get out of the Pizzaplex. However, over the course of the story, he becomes more aware of what's going on and the dangers around them, and as that happens, Freddy goes from being a buddy to being a protector, even putting himself in harm's way to protect Gregory, such as when he tries to take on Vanny and the staff bots, when he tackles Vanny off of a building, and even in the cut lines where he sacrifices himself so Gregory can get away.
Gregory, run! Do not look back! Do not watch!
He's even willing to stand up to his band and go against his band to protect the child.
Chica, Roxy, Monty, do not listen. Resist her.
However, Freddy and Gregory's bond goes beyond simple protection, and there's some cute cut dialogue that we didn't get that shows this.
Gregory, check out these shirts. Which one do you like best?
I don't know. That one, I guess.
Oh.
Freddy is actively trying to get to know Gregory, and he also shows some moments of parenting, such as when he reprimands Gregory for trying to cheat in Phaser Blast.
Shame on you, Gregory. We cannot enter together. That would be cheating. I am programmed not to cheat.
And though Freddy isn't initially sure about what's going on at the Pizzaplex, even doubting that Vanessa is trying to get Gregory, Freddy still believes in Gregory's fears. And if he doesn't, he still goes out of his way to accommodate them, not turning him over to Vanessa and covering for Gregory even when he has his head yanked off. There's even a line where Freddy questions Gregory about seeing Vanny.
Gregory, are you certain you have seen a dancing rabbit lady? I believe you if you say you have, but it is highly unlikely. I have not seen her, and she does not sound like a character we have at the Pizzaplex.
Though he seems doubtful about her, he expresses that he does believe Gregory. And that's what counts. Even if you don't believe there's a monster under the bed, checking for your kid's sake is worth the effort, especially if you end up catching a snake hiding under there. And this goes along with one of the most important things about Freddy. He treats Gregory like a person. I mean, he might let Gregory call a few too many of the shots, but he listens, and by the end of the game, he's more in touch with his feelings. Freddy might not always understand, but he wants to, and because of that, he has his eyes open to the dreadful things existing in the Pizzaplex.
Do not return. It will never be safe. I will miss you.
Forget the parents are useless, parents don't believe you trope. Freddy's going to tackle someone off a building for you. You just have to point him in the right direction. Freddy would never hurt his kids for his own entertainment, or mislead them to help himself, or ignore them. He would never be so involved with his own feelings that he ignores his kids' feelings. In fact, Freddy not only expresses his feelings openly, but he is willing to put them aside when he must. He wouldn't just assume his kid was playing a prank when he didn't show up. He would want to check in unless told elsewise.
Gregory, I'm not nearly that annoying, am I?
And most importantly, he signs his notes with Love Freddy. Freddy is the best father Five Nights at Freddy's has. And the moral of this story is, Glamrock Freddy could daddy me anytime. God, why did I write that? So yeah, time to reveal the truth. This wasn't really a video about the awful fathers at Freddy's. This was actually a big scheme to set up that Glamrock Freddy is the best dad ever, and he deserves more credit. Something I discovered while writing about Henry for what feels like the 50th time. Happy Father's Day, Glamrock Freddy. You are the best dad, and nobody matches you, except maybe that peculiar blue-eyed helpy. Thank you for watching.